What was your final fuck you to a boss you didn't like? Story 1, not me, but a buddy of mine worked at a Subway that was ran terribly. One night he calls me and says that he had enough of their shit, for th day in a row that he's alone with no word from management. He grabbed his things, locked the door, sent a message that he quit, then walked across the street and grabbed a drink while watching the confusion in people's faces wondering why Subway was closed at 7 p.m. Story 2, I was hired to do the payroll and the books by an independent business that sold to the automakers. It took me 3 days to figure out that he was collecting federal, state, Social Security, and Medicare taxes, but not turning them in. I left with proof of his chicanery on day 5 and gave it to the state and the feds. Despite quitting, I received unemployment because of his fraudulent business practices. Story 3, esthetician whose first job out of school was at a day spa that turned out to be super gross. I reported it to public health the day I quit. They ended up nearly failing a surprise inspection from the health department. Conditional passes like the one they ultimately ended up receiving were posted in the spa's front window in view of clients, and posted on the health department's website for 2 years. Story 4, not me and not my boss, but when I worked in concrete there was a homeowner everyone hated. Just the worst of the worst. So right before a big pour in what was supposed to be his living room, a coworker had a great idea. We used cardboard and built a mini stall and he took a dump right on the rebar before we covered it in concrete. So the owner would smell shit but have no idea where it was coming from, lol. Story 5, hey boss, I received an offer where I have better benefits, better pay, and I'm not on call. The only thing I requested was a plan be put in place to get me off of being on call after 20 years. His only response was, you're paid enough, and I can't develop a succession plan. I walked. Since then many other great staff left as well. What people are telling me is he believed I'd fold. Best choice I ever made. Story 6, I was being treated poorly by a boss at a position that entailed a 2-month international training stint once you met a certain set of criteria. I was applying for jobs and had one lined up and was able to negotiate it to start in 2 months. Achieved the criteria and went on the 2-month international training stint and just used it as a paid holiday. It was great. The day I came back I quit. Boss was not happy. Story 7, I quit this one place but told my boss, after working out my notice, if you're ever in a pinch, give me a call. She told me, I just don't think I want you in my life right now. I smirked and walked out. She then proceeded to call me a few months later, frantically looking for someone. I calmly stated, I just don't think I want you in my life right now, and hung up. It was a good feeling. Story 8, I left, and then my manager joined me in my new company. And then one of the developers. And then another one. And then a third started his own company, and were outsourced to him. And then Ed outsourced enough to one of the designers that they started up on their own. That left one designer and no devs, and his company went under. That will teach you for making me go to the outbuilding to make tea in my break. Story 9, I gave my 2 weeks notice and they waited until the last day to ask me to stay. Just unloaded about all the injustices I had endured working from them. How they took advantage of me. How they acted as children mostly. It was nothing big or over the top. Said it all calmly and they just took it. But just the simple clarity of speaking from the heart to stick up for myself without any worry of the consequences. Story 10, when a customer punched me, on camera, and screamed at me. This happened one day before I was meant to have 2 weeks of vacation. I kept being nice, only to be called into my boss's office later, to be berated. On the same day I handed in my 2 weeks notice and got out of there. I heard from ex-coworkers that my ex-boss had to close the place temporary because I was the only one that had the particular knowledge. Story 11, had the most passive-aggressive, narcissist boss who worked with us because she couldn't keep staff, some no more than one shift. On a day I was supposed to work, at the time I was supposed to begin my shift, I came in with my things to give back to her and my letter of resignation. I put them in the back room. I then walked out and continued with my day. She messaged asking for me to please come back. I said no. Story 12, Ooh ho ho ho, no no no. Department of Labor would have been fascinated to hear that one. They're used to butting heads with asshole corporations, but public sector law enforcement? They'd drop the fucking hammer on them for violating your rights. When I worked HR for a public sector employer, we had multiple people whose job it was to ensure we followed FMLA laws and gave people the time off they needed. Story 13, I worked at a dry cleaner for a summer. Front desk, cash under table type of job. I worked 50 hours one week and he told me he'd pay me time and a half for the OT. I go into work on payday and my cash envelope is not in the drawer. I called him and asked about it and he told me he couldn't pay me for my work yet. I kindly informed him that I was taking the money I was owed and locking up the shop and left. Story 14, I gave 3 weeks notice. He said nah, you can leave now. Then when I was packing up my toolbox he came and asked if I can just finish my shift and get this hot job out. I said okay, then just went to the break room and ate one bite of all of his food in his lunchbox, and at the end of the day he was asking about why I didn't do that job. I said, because fuck you, and your wife's sandwiches are dog's hit as I pulled away. Story 15, had requested, and gotten approved, time off for a wedding in which I was the best man. Boss said about 2 weeks ahead of time that he was canceling the request. I was already overworking for the asshat, so I said I've gotta go call my wife and talk it over with her and just left. Right before a very busy dinner shift. Almost felt bad for my coworkers, but they all hated that dude as well. Sure, they understood. Story 16, I quit and got my peers and subordinates new jobs at other places. Took his client list and sent them all recommendations for competitors with better deals. They shut down operations within 6 months. As a bonus, our kids were on rival basketball teams and we blew them out both times with a combined score of 40-2. I didn't prompt it, and my daughter didn't say so, but those were the 2 games she played the hardest in. Story 17, hasn't happened yet because I'm saving it till his retirement party. Boss stabbed me in the back repeatedly and wrote an absolutely horrific letter for my personnel file stating I was mentally unstable and unfit for duty. For context, my mother had died the week before and he caught me crying in my office between classes about it. At his farewell retirement party, I'm going to read that letter aloud to the whole crowd. Story 18, 2% raise after completing 2 multi-million-dollar projects with crazy timelines and budget constraints. Was doing work that was not in line with my job role for quite some time. I responded with my yearly review with a 2-week notice. Had a job offer for 20% more in 3 days that offered bonus and stock discounts. It's going to cost them more than the 20% raise to replace me. P.S. I'm a network engineer edited from original. Story 19, quit my job, 6-figure professional job, by the way, and at my exit interview the HR person asked me if I wanted him to check the eligible for rehire box and I said no, don't check the box, just in case I lose my mind someday and try to work here again. He then asked me if I wanted him to write down any verbatim comments in the open comment section. I just asked him to draw a picture of a middle finger. It was pretty fun. Story 20, this was in the wedding catering industry. I left work early one day after having come in early and finishing my job. My boss called me later that day to express his dissatisfaction with my productivity, and he was a dick about. I already basically hated the guy, so I told him that I'd be in super early, like 5 a.m., and that we could knock out the rest of the work together. Then I blocked his number and slept in. Story 21, I taught English in China for 6 years, and I'd believe it. Schools and language centers in China vary wildly in how good the administration is. If you're lucky, you get decent bosses who understand how vulnerable their foreign workers are and try to help them. On average, you get bosses who are decent enough, but don't really communicate because that's not how things work in Chinese companies. At worst, stuff like that. Story 22, not my job, but I got a call from an unknown number and was feeling froggy and answered it. It was some prick that immediately went on a rant about not showing up for a shift. I asked if he knew who he was talking to. He goes off on another rant. He didn't seem to want to listen to me tell him he had the wrong number, so I told him to fuck off. I quit. He told me that was obvious. I guess there's an opening at a Chipotle. Story 23, I really didn't want to work in a pub anymore and decided to just quit, came up to my boss and told him about it. He wasn't happy that I wanted to quit that day and not work till the end of the month. He said it wasn't fair. I just simply responded that life isn't fair and told him to fuck off. Then I just left, leaving him too stunned to speak. The best part is that I still got paid for the couple days I worked that month. Story 24, I convinced everyone else in the shop to quit at the same time, leaving the boss holding the bag and with only one other guy working for him who knew about this ahead of time and demanded that his pay be doubled or he was going to walk too. Don't bounce your paychecks, kids. It's the quickest way in the world to squander what loyalty your employees might have had and turn their devious minds to ways of screwing you in return. Please like, subscribe and press the notification bell. It really helps the channel out. Share your stories down below in the comments. Hope you enjoyed.